the shark bite, which number you want to see, go over, have questions about, show me on your hand. Okay. Okay, if you were a 5, raise your hand. But then I got a lot of those. If you were a 1, raise your hand. 2, 3, 4. We're gonna do 3 and 5. So for this one, if you were thinking about your products, this is a horizontal line. So the slope is. That's it. Okay, questions on that one? Number 5. If we were trying to find the slope of this, we had to convert this, get it back in slope-intercept form by subtracting 2x. Dividing everything by 5. Y equals negative 2/5. It's x plus 2, so the slope would be what? Negative 2/5. So today we're going to finish our transformation notes and start reviewing for our quiz on Friday, for our test on Tuesday. So if you don't already have your transformation notes out, get those out. Does anyone need another copy? Have binders of all the information. Yeah, so you learn a lot. Does anyone need another one of those? Also, this starts my memory. Did we finish the second page? Or okay, so on this page. Those are one. Those are one. Yeah. On this page, we are going to graph and describe our transformations. If you need to look back at our different transformations, shifted is your y-intercept, up or down, and then by how much. Steepness talks about your slope, and then reflected is also for your slope. So in number 1, if you want to know where you can grab that. I'm gonna draw in the original. You don't need to do this, but if you would like to, you can. Wait, this is the original one. Here. It's something. So again, you don't need to graph this, but if you would like to, you are welcome to. Then if we were graphing what's given, we have a y-intercept of -5, so I plot a point there, a slope of +6/1, so I could go up 6 and to the right 1. If I did it again, I'd be off graph. And then a line that goes through all of those. So I was comparing the graph we just drew to the original. What changed?
Everything.
Okay. What specifically changed? What about this? So we can say it's got steeper. And what did the slope of the y-intercept? Slope got steeper by how much? What's the slope of our new line? 6. So we got steeper by 6. Okay, what else changed? What about the y-intercept change? We got shifted down by how much? 5. Questions on that one? Let's draw this one, which happens to be the original. And if I'm comparing this to the original, it is the original. Did anything change? No, so we can say the slope and y-intercept stayed the same. Questions on that one? Then we're gonna skip 3 and 4 and go down to 5 and 6. But in number 5 and 6, they are not in slope intercept form, so we have to convert them back to slope intercept form. How would we do that? 2y equals -x plus 8, and then divide everything by. Our new equation is -1/2 x plus 4. Now we're gonna do the opposite. Now we're gonna see if we can compare the original, just looking off the equations, and then we'll graph it. So what changed? So using our words, it would be shifted, what direction?
Up.
Up or. What else changed? What about the slope? Less steep by how much? What's our new slope? But we're not looking at the negative. Those are 2 separate things. So just add 1/2. What does the negative do? What was that? There's a word for it. It's not about the steepness, but the other one. Most of you wrote it down. The slope also reflected. So now if we draw this in, we have a y-intercept at 4. Slope is negative or reflected, so we're gonna go up 1, to the left 2, as many times as possible. Down 1, right 2, as many times as possible, and draw your line. Questions on that one? We're gonna do the same thing with 6. How would we solve that one? That's 7x. Then we have y equals negative 7x plus 5. Comparing that to the original, what changed? Using our word, the y-intercept
Shifted up.
shifted up 5. What else? The slope is steeper by 7 and looks reflected. The slope was reflected and is steeper by 7 or 7 times as steep. And then we can graph this. Y-intercept at positive 5, slope is negative 7, so we can go down 7 to the right 1. And really just those 2 points. Questions on that one? Look at the 2 on the back. See or go over either of those. When you try those on your own, I would say be careful because the graphs are counting by 2s instead of 1s. We are going to switch gears and go over review stuff.